Hi everyone, welcome back. Hey, everybody doing good? Yes? Love to hear it. So what we'll do is before launching into the next panel, because one of the panelists, Deborah Joyce Holman, could not be here because she got hit by a car yesterday in Providence. It's even more complicated than that, but I will stop. No, it's horrible. That I'm gonna play about like a 15-minute part of her film, the video moment that is in the exhibition. And I'll give a little bit of a background. This exists in several different iterations, some of them being single channel, some of them being multi-channel. And this is kind of a combination of those iterations. And one of the versions of the film that I think this was at the ICA London in 2024, I want to say, is a 9-hour version of this film, Moment. I think that's Moment 2. But I'm not 100% sure. And the length is supposed to mimic the length of the opening day of a gallery or a museum. And I should also say, for those of you who know the reference point, that this is not so much a remake, but a reimagining of the documentary 1968, I believe. Someone correct me if that's not right, of the portrait of Jason, right? So it's a restaging of that with these two amazing actresses. And with that, I will start it.
A lazy cat, I hustle. I'm a stone wall, and I'm not ashamed of it. And what I really want to do is what I'm doing now, is perform. I'm a pretty funny guy, you know. These are cats that get into your business, you know, and then you gotta be hitting up just how much of your business you wanna let them get into. That's the mistake I suffered. I really suffered. Da-da, da-da. I looked at this village and smiled, and I said, they just take everything they give you. Everything they give you, just take it. And they have a thing, they have a finger.
A lazy cat.
Yes, there's a lot of material there. And I'll give you some
And
more.
it's stone wall, and I'm ashamed of it. And then what I really want to do is what I'm doing now,
Who I've got to tell.
is perform.
Yeah, there's lots of material. There's lots
it's like, these are cats. They get into your business, and then you want to be hip enough for just how much of your business you want to let them get into. That's been the story of my life. I'm really suffered.
When you sing a song and you do a bit, it has to be about something. You have to do it from experience. And I've been getting experience coming and going. You're supposed to be saying something. And I'm just going to let my modesty blaze. I figured if you can sell sex, comedy, and little tragedy, people love to see you suffer. Believe me, I've suffered. You know, it's funny you didn't have a picture made about you. I mean, I think I really did it, you know. I feel sort of grand sitting here and I have the nerve to keep trying, you know. He says, did you please them? And I said, if I don't please them, it's because I'm not trying.
I looked at this bitch and smiled and I said, they take.
No.
They take everything. They give everything they give you, just take it. And
Oh, there are good things to take too.
they have a finger. Yeah,
Yes.
that's
Hot to cry.
give you some more of it.
I mean, this is my moment, you know. I'm here, like, on the throne, you know. And I can say whatever. I got that, please. Yeah, I'm the bitch.
I'm going to tell.
Believe me, you know, take notice. I'm the bitch.
Lots of material. There's lots of material.
So, truth. Shut the bitches up. Tell them to get off the sea. Mother's coming through. I mean, it's just something about me. I have a way with, you know, like getting my shit across. So I just walk away and say, huh. But that's dangerous to get to because some people, you know, get revenge with me and they feel that in the end. I'm just a bona fide freestyle. I'm an experimental queen. Now that's the truth. That's the truth, so help me God, if I've ever told it. I'm a truth teller now, and there's not a lie in me. And well, I've been...
When you sing a song or you do a bit, it has to be about something.
I thought it was the most safe.
You have to do it from experience, and I see the experience coming and going.
Oh, I'm so ashamed.
You're supposed to be saying something.
I think it's about time I picked up my gate buns and swished out of here.
And I'm just going to let my modesty blaze.
I've got to tell.
I figured if you can sell sex, comedy, and a little tragedy, people love to see you suffer.
The lazy cats, I ask. I'm a stone and I'm not ashamed of it. But what I really want to do, is what I'm doing now, is perform.
I've suffered.
I'm a pretty frightened guy, you know. These are cats that
It's
take
funny
advantage,
feeling
you know.
having a picture made about
Keeping up with just
about
how
you.
much of your business you want
I mean, I think I really did it.
That's been the story
You know,
of
I feel
my
sort
life.
of grand
I really suffered.
sitting here
Ta-da. Ta-da.
And I have the nerve to keep trying, you know.
I looked at this picture and smiled, and I said they just take everything they give. Everything they give,
Says that.
just
Please them.
take it.
And I said, if I don't please them,
And they
it's because I'm ego.
Yeah, there's a lot of material there. And
No, I've been telling you the truth.
give me some of it a little later.
There was other good things to take material from. Oh yes, got to cry. I knew this is my moment, you know. I'm here, like, on the throne, you know. I can say whatever I got, and yeah, I'm the bitch.
There's lots of material.
Believe it, you know. Take notice. I'm the bitch. So, truth? Shut them bitches up. Tell them to get off the scene.
When you sing a song,
Mother's telling me.
it has to be about something.
I mean,
You
It's-
have to do it from experience.
it's
And
just
time
something about
the
me.
experience coming.
I have a way of doing it, like getting my shit
You're
across.
supposed to be saying
So I
something.
just walk away and say,
And I'm just going to
Ha.
let these delays.
but that's dangerous again,
And
a bit too,
sell
because
sex,
some of them,
comedy,
you
and
know,
a little tragedy. People love to see me suffer. And believe me, I've suffered.
get revengeful, you know. They feel they've been had. I'm just an experimental queen. Now that's the truth. That's the truth, so help me God, like I told you.
You know, I feel sort of
I'm
grand.
a truth teller now.
To keep trying.
And there's not a lie in me.
He says, did you please them?
Well, I said the respectable type. I always stayed where I thought it was the most safe. I sat there and I felt so bad. I just,
No. I've been telling you the
she
truth.
was so ashamed.
But there are other good things to take too. Oh yes. Got to cry. I mean, this is my moment, you know, I'm here like on the throne, you know, and I can say whatever I goddamn please. Yeah, I'm the bitch. Believe it, you know, take notice. I'm the bitch. So, true.
I think
Shut them bitches up. Tell
that's
them
when I
to
picked up my gay bands and switched out here.
I mean, it's just something about me. I have a way with, you know, like getting my shit across.
I've got to tell.
So I just walk away and say, ha, ha. But that's dangerous again too, because some of them, you know, get revenge for me, you know, they feel they've been had. I'm just bona fide principal. I'm an experimental queen. Now that's the truth. That's the truth, so help me God if I've ever told it. I'm a truth teller now. there's not a lie in me. And well, I've been the respectable type. I always stayed where I thought it was the most safe. I sat there and I felt so bad. I was so ashamed. I think it's about time I picked up my gay buns and switched out here. I've got to tell. I'm a lazy cat. I hustle. I'm a stone whore, and I'm not ashamed of it. And what I really want to do is what I'm doing now, is perform.
I'm a stone whore and I'm not ashamed of it.
I'm a pretty frightening guy, you know. These are cats that get into your business, you know, and they gotta be hip enough with just how much of your business
What I really
you
want
want
to
to
do
ever get into. That's been the story of my life.
is what I'm doing now.
I really suffered.
It's perform.
Ta-da. Ta-da. I looked at this bitch and smiled and I said, they just take everything they
I'm a pretty frightened guy.
everything they give you, just take. And they
These
have
are cats that get into your business. And then you have to be hip enough for just how much of your business you want to let them get
and
into.
I'll give you some of it a little later. Oof, I've got to
That's been the story of my life.
Yeah, there's lots of material. There's lots of material.
I really
You
suffered.
sing a song, or you do a bit, it has to be about something. You have to do it from experience. And I've been getting experience coming and going. You're supposed to be saying something, and I'm just going to let my modesty blaze. I figured if you can sell sex, comedy, and a little tragedy, people love to see you suffer. I've suffered. You know,
It's my vision, and it's not that I said. They take everything they give you. Everything they give you.
I think I'm
Here. Yes. And let me start by briefly introducing my co-panelists, including Deborah. Deborah Joyce Holman is interested in how our living together in this world is shaped by the mundane and relational. They're interested in the politicized processes of interplay between material and symbolic that take place when something becomes art, quote unquote, and what those structures and processes might reveal about our predominant systems and their conventions. And then to my left is Nadia Huggins. who's a multidisciplinary visual artist. I will not read the full bios, but as Jamal said, they're on the website. Using photography, video, and installation, her work merges documentary and conceptual practices which center Caribbean land seascapes to explore the poetics that lies in the mundane and the quotidian of human life along with its ties to temporality. And then to my right is Texas Isaiah, who's an award-winning first-generation visual narrator, born and raised in Brooklyn, New York, who lives in New York City and LA. He's an autodidact with a giant appetite for traveling, so his process and work aren't tethered to one geographical location. And thank you, Nadia and Texas Isaiah, for joining us today. And of course, also thank you for your amazing work over the years. And I want to start very, very broadly and invite you to think or to help us visualize, imagine your artistic practice or practices, right? How do you go about working? How do you think about interacting with different audiences, et cetera, and so on? And I would particularly be interested in hearing you speak about the work on the pieces that are included in the in the exhibition. So let's just start there at the kind of the beginning of it all, so to speak, and then we can go in more particular directions later on.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much, Alex, for having me here. Okay, where can I begin? My practice. I mean, I guess I can speak a bit about audience first, because it's not really something that I put at the forefront of the work that I do necessarily. I mean, I think most artists kind of first begin from a place of like thinking about the work that resonates with themselves. I try my best to represent whatever I do. If it doesn't resonate with me on some kind of meaningful level, I don't think it's going to necessarily resonate with other people. And, my goal with my work isn't necessarily to reach everyone. I don't expect everybody to understand the nuance of my work, even though I am dealing with a very kind of universal subject matter, particularly when I'm working with the sea. I think water is a kind of a very universal element that we kind of all can relate to on like a sensual level. Like it's something we come from in some ways. We've all been born we understand that feeling of being in a kind of a liquid medium. So I think working with that subject matter has actually really helped me to kind of break through a lot of restrictions of what I could allow other people to feel through my photographic medium. I mean, in terms of my practice, I began doing underwater work. It wasn't always like the primary focus in my photography. I began kind of photographing the everyday Caribbean life because, growing up in the Caribbean, I mean, we're kind of bombarded with a lot of tourism imagery, and even persons living inside of the space kind of start replicating these images because, we kind of told tourism is our only kind of means of growing the economy. So people kind of fall into this ways of making images. But I always kind of resisted that. I mean, I always got very irritated with this kind of limitations of colors that we're supposed to represent in images. And I started really experimenting when I was much younger with just making a kind of a gothic image of the Caribbean almost, which seemed kind of counter to what people understood of the Caribbean at that time. So when I started making underwater work, because I live near the beach. I mean, I grew up near the beach. I see it as a kind of an extension of my home life. I kind of treated it like how a street photographer treats like going out in the street and just kind of documenting their community. I mean, I see the ocean as a kind of an extension of my community in some ways, and of course, people that go to the beach and even the marine life that exists there, it's all kind of part of this kind of landscape of my home, So I wanted to be able to find ways to kind of represent that in my images that felt authentic to me, A lot of the images I had seen at the time of the Caribbean underwater was through a very kind of ethnographic lens of scientists coming and photographing coral, and even like just like specific types of coral. Like there's even a kind of a prejudice of like the types of it's like kind of landscaping underwater. So it's like we're gonna look at this particular reef because this is more like aesthetically pleasing than this. So I kind of had this undertaking of trying to capture all of these things, and especially the people, because it was like, I wasn't seeing like Caribbean people in the ocean. It's like there's this kind of narrative that black people don't know how to swim, or like we're not like experiencing joy in these spaces, and it's like it's always very performative. Like you see like the kind of image of like the black Caribbean body jumping off of a boat. That there's these historical images of like boys like jumping after coins, or like, it's all kind of performative. So when I began doing this work, I really kind of wanted to undertake this kind of other perspective of what was beyond the performative, what happened when people break through the surface, and like that kind of like return to the vulnerability of self. So that was kind of like the jumping point for that work.
Thank you.
Awesome. So I actually started out as a writer. So I feel like my first foundation was language. And I stepped away from writing because my best friend growing up, who was also my first love, passed away. And I was 18. She was, I think, 19. So I left that practice behind. And I've always had like a very complicated relationship with writing even now, although I love language. I love reading. I love books. But I ended up, I did like go to school for a little bit. I ended up dropping out, and I ended up sort of immersing myself in the hardcore punk scene. So I think that between writing and music, it guided me towards photography. When I entered the hardcore punk scene, that was maybe a year before a lot of our venues in New York City closed down. And so, the venues that were still sort of ongoing were more so located in Long Island. And I think that, being a person who was a part of an all-black punk band, it was actually pretty dangerous to travel to those spaces because there was just a lot of racism, a lot of Nazis that were a part of that scene as well. But as I was like making music, I was also photographing, and then I ended up stumbling into nightlife. And so I think that the starting points of my like photographic journey, like kind of just, it's like extremely capacious. And I think that as somebody who grew up in Brooklyn, if you've ever been to New York City, it is like a extremely overwhelming, like vibrant place to be in. You're always surrounded by people. And I think that I was always like very deeply intrigued by people's relationship to space and place, which is topophilia. And I think that those kind of questions around how we form our relationships to each other and to the environments we are a part of sort of had like started to inform like my practice. And I think that also just, growing up in New York and being a part of like a lot of queer scenes and being a queer kid, and then, being a trans person, I think that also deeply informs like how we are engaging with self and how we're engaging with others. And it's so interesting because I was thinking about your work when I saw it earlier, and right now I've been meditating on being, a person who's first generation. My family is from Guyana, Venezuela, Barbados. One of the pieces that I have in the show, it's from a project called It's the Starkness of the Day, and it's just kind of about like the private, quiet moments of experiencing grief in personal spaces. And I made the image of Lex fallen into my bed after my aunt and my paternal grandmother passed away. And then a year after that, my maternal grandmother passed away, and she was my last living grandparent. And I've also been navigating parental caretaking. My father was diagnosed with cancer last year. And so I've just been thinking about like the disconnection to like my legacy, my history, but then it also informs like my relationship with nature, being like there's something like very familiar about your images that I feel like I've maybe never experienced in this sort of iteration of my lifetime, but it feels like very past life in a way. But also, you know, just being a person growing up in New York, like I think that my relationship to nature and public space, like growing up in the 90s in New York City, like, and even now, parks are very surveilled. And so I don't feel like I ever had that relationship with nature, you know, in New York until I moved to California. And even thinking about the ways in which my work shifted, because I was making a lot of black and white images, and then when I moved to California, I was creating a lot more color images. But yeah, right now I've been thinking about, you know, going back to Guyana and reconnecting with my family and reconnecting with land in this way. And I've just been meeting a lot of like Caribbean artists, you know, who grew up in their like sort of homeland, and finding like a lot of like familiar threads in our like relationship to nature and to like these embodiments of these elements that have been here, you know, even before us. You know, I love what you said about, you know, water, how, I mean, it's so inaccessible and also equally accessible to us, right? But yeah, I'll stop there.
Thank you.
Yeah.
For that. And yeah, I'll start with. I have a question for both of you too, but I'll wait on that. I'll ask you a follow-up question, and I'm wondering if you could say. I mean, you talked about it in general terms, but if you could say a little bit more about how the two pieces in the exhibition from Circa No Future that you've been doing as a series since 2014, what that work sort of has entailed, because the work entails both work with nature, quote unquote, right, but also with these young men, boys, right, and you talked so beautifully about the kind of violence that usually frames that connection, and how your work is pushing against that particular violence, right? That is part of the history of colonialism, right? Part of the history of visual culture. So yeah, if you could say a little bit more about that, yeah, would be great.
Okay. I mean, when I sort of began conceptualizing the work, one of the things I was thinking about a lot at the time was like time traveling. I was kind of interested in making a film actually at the time, and using the ocean as a kind of a portal into this, I don't know, like other world. I wasn't sure if it was a past or future. But then as I kind of started to make the images, and you know, like it was really kind of responding to a very nostalgic moment in my childhood. I mean, the location where these boys are jumping off of is very specific. So the bay that I go to, St. Vincent is a volcanic island, so we have a lot of kind of like islets sort of off the coast that people can swim to. And this one particular rock that these boys go on, it's like, it kind of almost looks like a bunch of Tetris blocks stacked. So like it's like a kind of a natural amusement park. So there's like different levels that kids go up and climb on and jump off of. And of course, like you prove like your manlyhood or whatever, the higher up you go. So I mean, I used to go there as a kid, which was unusual, of course. I was a girl, but it was like clear that now, obviously looking back, I'm like, of course I'm queer. So naturally I'll be hanging out with these boys and trying to also prove my worth in this space. So I kind of felt a familiarity with the space in that sense. And I wanted to, yeah, kind of highlight that joyfulness of this experience in the work. But yeah, you know, like when I started, you know, I was thinking about this idea of time travel, and it just so happens through kind of making the images The title "Circle No Future" kind of was like a poetic, I don't know, accident in a way, because one of the boys had on a T-shirt that said "Circle No Future," and it had like a race car driving. I was like, oh, it's actually like quite, it fits with the kind of idea of what I was thinking about these boys kind of existing in a time, and like the ocean really is a kind of a place that just distorts time. I mean, obviously we can only hold our breaths for so long and go under, but within that moment you really are, yeah, you're kind of suspended in a place you're not really quite sure, like if it's present, past, future. It's like it just dissolves all these notions of what we understand on land. And like some of the work kind of also deals with this idea of like moving away from the land and these sort of social constructs that exist that kind of hold us in place of like, like I'm black, you're white, like gay, like straight, whatever. Like these things can't exist in that space, because we're not meant to live in the sea. It's like a space that, any of us get thrown into that space. It's like you just kind of instantly kind of go into survival mode. So you don't have time to think about these constructs of what it is that limits our ways of being on land. So I think of it as a very democratizing space in that way. And yeah, I mean, in terms of the boys and like that kind of relationship of making the work, I mean, it's like different groups of young men, like between like the ages of 12 to 18, and over like periods of time when they're on like a school break, like groups of them will go to the beach and swim out, because it's also like they can be away from the adults, they can just kind of be themselves without anybody kind of like overseeing them. And like there's a sense of freedom. Of course, like, there's the performance of them screaming and jumping, and like that, the image with the kid jumping off, like like they're doing all these poses that they're not saying that they're explicitly queer, but obviously there's kind of like moments there where I'm
it's
sensing
very much a queer space,
yeah,
without
it
necessarily
is like
having to
that
be said.
pose the guy is doing, he called it the cover girl, so like he will scream cover girl and like jump, like so like there's all these moments with these kids that are kind of fun. And like when because in the ocean obviously you can't see my body and they're just seeing the top of my head, so they think I'm a boy as well swimming towards them, so that like everybody's guard is down at that point, and that performance, that vulnerability that they have with each other is there. But of course, as I approach closer, they realize that I'm a girl, a woman, and then the relationship kind of changes, and then there's a performance again of like, oh, like we're boys and we have to kind of like perform this masculinity. But the moment that I'm particularly interested in is when they break through the surface, and then because you're like just trying to regain breath, there's no room to perform because you're just surviving, and like the things that your body does in that space is so natural, so vulnerable, so fragile. And I thought that was really beautiful in seeing these young men sort of like in that space and just allowing themselves to just be. So I kind of became obsessed with capturing that moment in particular over the span of the images. And yeah, that's kind of the gist.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Beautiful gist. And I guess with Texas Isaiah, I would also like to hear you speak a little bit more about, you said, how you're interested in how folks relate to space, and then you were talking about, your own personal history with New York, with Los Angeles, and then with, the Caribbean, broadly defined, that you don't know, but, you have that feeling. How much is the, not only the space, as in like the interior or the building, but like the kind of larger space, is this a part of your practice? Because it does seem to me, even though in your work it's not always visible, the space, whether it's outside, inside, what kind of room it is, right? In some cases it's more obvious, like with the piece you were talking about, where there's a bed, so we assume it's a bedroom, right? But nevertheless, for me at least, when I'm looking at your work, there is a kind of deep specificity about the kind of spaces that these images are taken in, even when it's not explicitly articulated in the image. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, so, yeah.
I think that there's the environment is always like an additional sitter. When I'm thinking about crafting an image with a person that I'm in conversation with, which is how most of my images are made, is by way of having a conversation with a person about their relationship to being imaged and their relationship to being in a space. And so it really depends on the project, but I think I've always had a habit about like revisiting a space over and over again and sort of just trying to figure out how to whether or not the space needs to be obscured or needs to be seen. Mm-hmm. And I always like, and I think that also just like revisiting a space too. I mean, I think that as a photographer, I've never actually had a traditional studio. And that's mostly just because of like accessibility. It's expensive. But I also feel like I don't like feeling very confined. Like I've had the opportunities to maybe, when I did a residency with Bafo last summer at Fire Island, I did have a space I could work in, and I would just stand in there and I'm like, I don't feel free enough to think as capaciously as I would want to. And I think that the outdoors kind of allows me to really just deeply think about how to just maybe think more. Maybe there's something about like being in a deeper relationship to like images in a way. I don't know, like the outdoors just sort of like defines that for me or like complicates that for me. But yeah, like I love going to parks. I love exploring the space as I'm creating images. I think that that's also like really important to me. It also feels very playful to me as well. And I think that, when I'm thinking about my practice, I am thinking about, even if the themes are very complicated, like, with grief or with death, like there's still some sort of playfulness that I need to have and to engage with the space itself, But the work in the show with Lex, that's actually my apartment in LA. And it was supposed to be a self-portrait project, but I felt a little bit too vulnerable and exposed to image myself. And so Lex is actually a longtime collaborator. I've been photographing him for 9 years now. And there's another sitter in the project, Mello Jalil. And so I spoke to them in depth about what was going on, and they were also grieving in their own ways. And so, the way that I created that project was that, I sort of imaged them on different days at the same time. And the way that it was exhibited, because it was specifically made for Art Basel, the images mirrored each other. And it's a very it's a very quiet project. I actually didn't enjoy it when I made it because I felt a little rushed. And usually when I make images, I need to sit with them. But I wasn't afforded that opportunity to do so. And so I think that with this image in the show, it's actually the most like fatigued image because it's actually a diptych. So if you look on the screen, Lex is on my couch. That's the first image. And he's sort of pushing up the air. And so what's happening is that he's pushing himself. He's actually pushing himself. And to me, like, that was just like a representation of like my grief at the time, or even my current grief, where sometimes it just feels like you're being like ping-ponged back and forth between a frame, and it feels like disorientating in a lot of ways. But yeah, like, even choosing like a place like my apartment where, I don't, I'm very old school. I don't invite a lot of people to my space. I also have just a spiritual practice and altar practice. So it's not like anybody can just like roll up in there. But I think it was really important to use my space in that way because it was also like, it was cathartic, And so, like, yeah, I think that my, like, relationship to space, like, I think it really depends on the project. And it also really depends on how much I need to, like, how much I need to like challenge myself, you know, as well, like, you know, to photograph a vulnerable project in a space that, you know, I occupy, and then having that be sort of publicized is very vulnerable and is very raw, you know, in ways. But yeah.
Thank you. I'm wondering, Nadia, because you recently started doing, I'm not sure I would call them self-portraits in the traditional sense. Would you call them that? But that you represent yourself or a version of yourself in your work. And I'm just thinking about what Texas Isaiah was saying about the whole vulnerability bit, because it's something that you started fairly recently, right?
I've always
Oh, you
done
always have?
self-portrait
Okay,
work, but I mean,
okay.
obviously, I think this work really, the transformation image, the image with the sea urchin,
Yeah, which is part of
Yeah.
the series up there.
Yeah, I had always started off with self-portraits because, you know, when you're doing photography, sometimes you just can't get models. Like you ask
Yeah.
your family or your niece, or, you know, like you kind of begin from that point, and then you realize, okay, I don't have anybody. I want to practice with a certain light, and, you know, like it's really just a way to kind of train yourself. I feel less comfortable photographing myself now
Okay.
as I'm getting older, but when I was younger, it felt interesting. I don't know. It felt like, I don't know. You feel like you're embodying somebody else
Okay.
when you photograph yourself in the image. Like I'm a very kind of quiet, generally kind of chill, calm person, but I feel like through an image, I can actually like project something else, kind of strong, confident in myself that I might not necessarily feel like I give off otherwise. And well, in terms of the transformation images, so it's a series of 11 diptychs where it's basically mainly my head, but also like different parts of my body that is photographable underwater, because I'm taking selfies pretty much as I go under. Like I take a breath and I'm kind of performing for the camera and trying to capture different perspectives of myself that I can then merge with different marine life. So like sea urchins, bits of coral, yeah, different types of things. And it's basically these two worlds sort of like coming into contact with each other. When I began documenting the coral, I mean, not really thinking about climate change at that time, but I understood that something was happening to the reefs and on the beach that I grew up on. I mean, obviously, as a child going there, like it was very vibrant, very alive. And every time I would return, something different was happening, and I wasn't quite sure. So I started kind of documenting this over the span of like 3 years, pretty much. And yeah, I mean, like thousands of images of coral in my body, and I managed to kind of like pare it down to these kind of 11 portraits of myself. And, you know, like we have like this sort of like history of carnival, obviously in the Caribbean, where there's a masking, there's a kind of performance of self. I mean, it's like a way to mock, to intimidate, to be somebody else. And I thought, like, you know, like it would be so interesting to kind of try and recreate this through photography in some way. I mean, not necessarily like explicitly dealing with carnival, but like using the kind of process of making mass pretty much through the image, and masking myself with the environment to kind of like portray this kind of degradation of this space that I was so familiar with. So yeah, in that sense, I don't even with those images, I don't feel like I'm fully revealing myself because I'm performing something else. You know, like I'm playing mass pretty much.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's a beautiful way of thinking about it and
Yeah.
putting it. Thank you. The next question is something that you already mentioned, Texas Isaiah. I think this is something that carries through, I would say, almost all the pieces in the exhibition, including the Deborah's film, which is this tension between visibility on the one hand and then shadows, opacity, and blur on the other, right? And I think that happens both visually, but also in all these other, I would kind of describe them like senses of vibe, right? I mean, I think with most explicitly with the image of Lex, is it? Is that their
Sir
name?
Lex, yeah.
Sir Lex, sorry.
Yeah.
Sir Lex.
That's his, that's what he likes to be called.
Yeah, no, that's what I shall call
yeah,
him.
Yeah, yeah.
That there's an explicit blur there, right? And then I think in so much of your work, Nadia, including the Transformation series, there is perhaps this kind of masking where human bodies kind of meld into the environment, right? But not in this violent colonial way, right? But in all these other kinds of interesting ways. Also, just thinking about in that image of yours, Texas Isaiah, and most of your images, there's no faces present, right? There's maybe sometimes an idea of a face somewhere that's suggested, but it's not represented. So, and I'm thinking about this also, especially in relationship to the to photography as a medium, right? Where the kind of traditional impulse is for clarity, visibility, right, knowability, and to a certain extent surveillance, right? And I think both of y'all's work really works in all these different ways with those presumptions, but also really works against them at the same at the same time.
Yeah, I think that, like, even when I look through my images, like, I think that there's like specific moments when there's, where there's an intention around creating a privatized space with a sitter, and then other images where it is just like very clearly defined that, sort of playing around with like the gaze, where the sitter is actually gazing at the audience instead of the other way around, And I like playing with that because I think that when you are someone who is intentionally marginalized and has been still continuously erased from a lot of visual archives, and you're also working with people who are being continuously erased as well, I think that creating these like private moments in this public atmosphere, it is very complicated. And I think that I'm always just trying to find a way for me and the sitter to sort of be in a space exist in a space, talk about what it means to be for them to be in a space where they feel like grounded in an ongoing archive. And I remember I saw Sir Lex actually the night before I left at karaoke. He loves karaoke. And we were at the bar, and he's like, it's very endearing. He said, even after 9 years, he's like, I feel like, he said, like, I always just feel like very held by like the way that you look at me. And I think that is such a difficult thing to offer somebody in a medium that is very violent and extractive. And also understanding that is just also something that I can perpetuate even if it is not my intention, right? Intention versus impact. And so I think that, like, the way that these images are crafted, like it again really depends on the conversation that I am having with a sitter, because sometimes, like you said, like, it is very difficult to find people to photograph, and it is because of that fatigued with being seen, and then also being, somebody can really love your work and then they are scared of being public, right, and being visible. Because those are very shaky foundations, and also what it means for photography to be like reflective of self, to see yourself, and even with my self-portraits that I've made, like, they are obscured because, I mean, one, I have a tough time seeing myself, and then also I'm trying to sort of push back against these like extractive gazes. And I think that also with dealing with having to contribute to building, along with other visual narrators, a growing Black trans archive. There is no blueprint or necessarily a foundation. And so it feels very, it can feel very scary, to be honest with you, to figure out like how to have like this temporary representation of this person during this time and build off of that, which is also why I photograph people over and over again. And I think that that's also inspired by like, visual relationships that, of work that I've loved, like Gordon Parks and Muhammad Ali. I love those photographs that they made together. And also there was just such a huge age gap as well, but yeah, like, I think that when a sitter is when I could tell that they're just really just afraid or maybe not as open to being imaged, I think that there's a way to, again, obscure the image. And so usually they'll be turning around and turning away from the camera. Their gaze would be like averted in some way. But also, again, like a large part of that is censoring themselves and censoring their existence, their piece, while also being a part of this archive, because I do believe that everybody needs to be deeply witnessed and documented in a way as well, to prove like an existence, and I think that that's where the conversation is also important as well, because I don't think that archive making is just about visualizing people, but it is also about being able to talk about people. Like I've been photographing Lex for 9 years, and he's an amazing filmmaker. He is a Scorpio. he's a very like precious human being. And he's always been a person who has been just so open to being with me on this journey. And so not only to be able to photograph him in all of these different ways, in all of these different iterations of our like livelihoods, but then to be able to like talk about him, yeah.
And I think if I can just very quickly, and then I'll let you speak. No, I really like what you said about photographing sitters, people repeatedly, right? Because then you get not only one version, right? Which is kind of one of the foundational violences of photography in the traditional sense, but you get all of these different versions of a person in different times and different in different places, and then you add to that the talking or even maybe writing about, right? That you have all of these different dimensions of this this person. So yeah.
Yeah, I also feel like that there's a lot about autonomy too that I think that sitters deserve, Yeah, I just wanted to add that as well.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think it boils down, again, like, I mean, there's a kind of a code of ethics in photography when photographing people. I mean, I'm not a photojournalist, so I don't have the responsibilities that they might have to record something in a very specific, I mean, I don't want to use the word honest, because, I mean, truth and honesty can mean anything with photography. I mean, it takes form in different ways. But yeah, for me, I mean, the critical thing, especially when you're photographing people from a community that you might not necessarily have a deep connection to, and I mean, in particular, I can speak about with the young boys. I mean, they're teenagers, they're Black. I mean, there's a class divide between us. I mean, there's different kind of nuances of race and class in the Caribbean that might not necessarily exist in the same way, like in the US, for example. But, like, these are things I can't really ignore. So, I mean, I'm already kind of coming into this space with a sort of a privilege. So, I mean, I have to be aware of that. And I have a responsibility as a photographer to present them in a particular way. I mean, of course, there's sort of like consent. I mean, that's the first thing. So you don't start going into a space and start photographing people without kind of like informing them about what you're doing. But yeah, like what Texas was saying, it's like, kind of that kind of obscuration of the face or the body can help to kind of, you can still sort of capture the essence of a person even through doing that. I mean, it's, I guess, why silhouettes are so powerful, because even within, yeah, this kind of obscuration, I mean, like Ajama's work is sort of, it kind of deals with that. Like, I mean, you're lighting very specific parts of the body, and you can still kind of get the essence of a person in that moment. And I mean, like I said, I feel a responsibility, to preserve some kind of dignity in people, because as like time goes on, like I don't know. I mean, I don't think they might necessarily be uncomfortable with the image, but people's lives change, and you don't really know. We all kind of look back in a moment and might feel a particular way about it, But I mean, in terms of like that kind of like merging of the environment with the body, like a lot of my work does that. I mean, I whether I'm doing it through the ocean, through like bubbles in the sea, or like leaves, or I think there are ways to kind of like merge these environments that people exist in to still reveal something about themselves. And I mean, like particularly in relation to the ocean, I mean, like that in a way is also a kind of a lens in itself, because I mean, we're not like naturally attuned to seeing underwater. I mean, even with, like just our eyes, like if you were to open your eyes, things are blurred, so we already need tools to kind of like distill that in a way. So you're kind of seeing through these kind of layers of lenses almost. Like, I mean, there's your goggles, there's your eyes, there's the lens of the camera, and the camera only fixates on a specific thing once it's in focus. And I mean, on land it's different, because I mean, you can capture sharpness of everything around you. Under the water, that's not possible. So it's like you really have to fixate on the thing that you want to capture. And a lot of things are going on. There's bubbles, I mean, there's fish, there's trash. I mean, sometimes it's chaotic. You would think it's calm and peaceful, but there is a lot happening quite quickly. And I don't use like any like dive tanks or anything. I'm just like taking a breath and doing these photographs. So it's like also just responding to my own body and what the other person is doing. And yeah, I think the images just kind of unfold naturally through this dance of both of us just existing in the space.
Thank you. Thank you both. And then this is already something that has been talked about or touched on in a few different ways, but I was wondering if you could talk about the significance of collaboration and community for your work. I'm also thinking about Texas Isaiah, for instance, the series with Miss Boogie, right? Mm-hmm. That you've also been working on for a longer period, right? That's not only that's not only one, yeah. And Nadia, the boys, but also I'm presuming there are other parts of this that are collaborative for you as well. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, again, like there's that kind of negotiation in the beginning of meeting these groups of boys, and it is a collaboration because they're kind of calling me in also to photograph them. It's not that I'm just going in and I'm like, okay, I'm going to take photos of you. They want to be seen in that space, what I mean? Because there's also like the novelty of like having an underwater camera and like seeing themselves. Like it's cool to them, So I feel
because it is cool.
It is cool. No, it is. Of course, it's so much fun, and they know that. So there's a kind of a joyfulness and a play involved, and I've never really felt unwelcome. I mean, of course, there's a moment where like, okay, we're tired, like we don't want a camera being pointed at us, and you have to kind of know how to sort of read the room with people, and I'm sure you have to deal with it as well. Like people just get tired at some point when you're photographing them, and you have to sort of respect that. But yeah, I mean, I think like collaboration for me kind of goes beyond that, because I mean, like my work has evolved just beyond photographing people. I mean, it kind of ended up spilling over into a bit of activism as well. So basically all of the marine images that I had been photographing for the transformation portraits with my face and the coral, because I had this extensive kind of documentation of my bay, it kind of acted as an archive and evidence for the presence of this reef that was alive and thriving. And, like there are a lot of beaches in the Caribbean now that are kind of being, bought by these kind of international investors who want to basically transform the space, put in a big hotel, put in sand, rip out a reef, like, what do you call it, like, kind of clean the space, with like no regard for the environment, displacing people, not really thinking about the implications of what these structures actually do along these coastlines. So I had a kind of a situation unfold with some investors that had bought a hotel near the beach, and they wanted to basically rip out this reef in front of the hotel that they just bought. And like they had put out this thing to public saying it was dead, and that they were gonna remove the reef, put in concrete X blocks, and plant an artificial reef. Which, for the life of me, I was like, this is the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Anyways, so like, of course, like, I'm not usually a vocal person, but I felt like compelled to respond to this because it's my home, it's my home beach. I had started sharing all the images that I had been documenting, being like, no, this is actually not true. The reef is alive, and most people are not going to the beach snorkeling. They're not like spending that same kind of time and effort into looking to see what's alive is like. But like people who operate and do these things, they kind of go based on that information that nobody knows what's there, so we're just gonna do it anyway, and maybe they wouldn't question anything. So the images kind of became part of this movement, and like people started writing in letters to the planning department. There was a huge petition, and then we were able to kind of get them completely like rejected from doing anything, which was a real sort of like monumental moment for environmental work on the island. So I felt like even through my practice of making art, it's like I had like this archive of images from the work that I've been doing that was able to actually just make a real impact. So that to me felt really sort of tremendous in the making.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you.
Collaboration
And community. Okay. It was at the tip of my tongue. I feel like I had a long travel day yesterday, so I feel like my brain is like on that dial-up. Honestly, I would photograph anybody. That's just sort of how I've always just, approached my practice, where I think that I want it to be accessible to anyone that wants to be able to work with me. And I think that there's something that, I don't think that maybe I always felt that way, but I do think that that sort of thinking is because I have integrated how also, desire informs archives and also how we photograph people and how we approach people, and through that integration, I think it's allowed my practice to just be a lot more open, and I want to, I don't know, I want to be accessible in a way. I want not me. I want the practice to be accessible in a lot of ways, so that people do have the opportunities to see themselves if they choose to, that the practice can be approachable. The practice can also, involve a lot of different kinds of people, which I think that, my practice doesn't necessarily. It doesn't involve as many, folks that I may want to, or maybe also sometimes, people are sometimes afraid of, being imaged in certain ways. And I think that it also requires a lot of patience. I think most of my images have been years in the making, conversations, or, sometimes it didn't work out because, this person moved to a different city, and, just trying to figure out how to keep the conversation going. Even if we're talking about making an image for 10 years, there is still an intention to do so, but yeah, I really love too that it allows, the collaboration aspect allows you to, get to know people in a deeper way. It allows you to be in community, to commune with people, to, I don't know, just like learn about like what someone wants for themselves, and how that also it's able to like reflect in the image as you're like creating it with someone. I think that there's something very deeply romantic about image making and the ways in which I approach it. But I'll stop there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can I ask a follow-up question?
Yeah, of course.
I would be interested to hear you speak about how that is similar to or different from the kind of work you do for an app dweller, right? Which
Yeah.
it's by nature communal, but
Yes.
it's communal in a different kind of way. So I'm just wondering, do you approach that differently because you can't plan ahead as much, et cetera, and so on? Yeah, what is your process there like, and how does that work with collaboration and community?
That's a really great question. If folks don't know, Dweller is a Black-led electronic and house music festival that happens in New York City every February. It's for 5 days. And we took a break last year, but that's where we met, actually, in person. That was fab. I photographed 18 venues in 5 days.
That's impressive.
And
Very impressive.
And with that work, I started in nightlife, so I think that now, like, I don't do events anymore. They're actually like very laborious. But with Dweller, actually, Frankie started Dweller, and I just emailed her, and I was like, "Do you have Black people like working on your like visual archives?" And she's like, "No." And I was like, "Well, I'll do it for free." I was like, I don't care. I know y'all don't probably have money, but like, I'll just do it because I wanted to find a way to like return back home. Like, I think that every time I go back to New York City, I'm trying to pour back into the city that has raised me, that has like informed like so much of how I approach my practice. And that is my way of giving back. And I think that nightlife photography is very complicated because I think that at least with Dweller, I think that there is a knowing that there's a possibility that you may be imaged. And so I think that the images that I create, they're usually like with, not too many, I don't take too many portraits, but usually they're just kind of sort of like in the moment of like people enjoying like the music, enjoying the atmosphere, enjoying the energy. I think that the consensual part and the collaboration part gets skewed. I think that when you begin to think about, I don't know, like making a book, or like publicizing it in a way. Like, I think that with Dweller, these are just sort of it's an internal archive. It's not like anything. I mean, maybe we'll like give some images to press, but I think that there's just like a common knowledge in community that like there needs to be a visual archive attached to this like moment, because it is one of the only, I may be wrong, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that maybe in the States it's probably one of the only Black-led festivals. Yeah. And so I think,
especially for electronic music.
Yes, especially for electronic, house music, techno, which was birthed by Black people, of course. And yeah, like I think that there's just a knowing. And I think also because I'm from New York, I think there's a trust there, because I bump into a lot of people from many different iterations of my life at Dweller, and also people that I would be surprised that's into house music. I don't know. I think it's like interesting. I feel like sometimes people are like a little bit maybe afraid to admit that they love house music because of the ways in which it's conflated with techno and EDM, and like how people believe that that's just sort of like white when it's not, So, yeah, I think that when you start to like publicize images, that's when consent and collaboration gets blurry. And I think that even, when I think about exhibiting images, I always, at least with these two images from these two different projects, they knew that it was to be exhibited.
Okay.
So I usually have those conversations with sitters. And sometimes sitters are like, hey, like, I have also a lot of private archives where people commission me because they quit their job. I've had commissions like around that, or it folks is like 1 year top surgery anniversary, or somebody's just making like a very serious decision and they're like, hey, I just want this for myself. I don't want this in public, and I honor that. And then like when I'm creating work and I'm like, okay, there's a possibility that this may be in a public space. That is a conversation that I have with folks beforehand, because I have like mediated and witnessed situations where people are like seeing their image like in a book or on a wall, and they're like, well, I didn't know that this was going to happen. And then there's that like that discomfort, where people feel like visually violated. So I always just try to make sure that I'm having those conversations with folks as we're creating images, and also that they have the autonomy to change their mind. Because to me, like, if I need to pull an image from an exhibit, like, that's fine. Like, it's not really a big deal. I can make more images or I can find another image, but I think it's really important for the sitter to feel like, hey, like, when I work with Texas Isaiah, I feel honored. And if I don't feel honored, I can at least have a conversation with him about it, and we can meet each other halfway. But even with I wanted to, if it's okay, I wanted to talk about 100 Lifetimes, the image of the two black trans men who they're not kissing, one is biting the other's lip. But
an important distinction.
Yes. Even with that image and thinking, like, you think about like collaboration is like a lot easier with people like that, very well, and I think that with these two guys, like I just knew them online. And as I was creating, this project, Flowers at Your Feet, A Cherished Horizon, which is a project about black trans men sort of like existing in a perpetual dream state, and they're sort of like they're kind of existing in the same orbit, but like in varied times and locations. And the reason why I'm continuing to work on this project is because of the erasure of black trans men from a lot of like black masculinity studies, but specifically this portion of the project with Mason and Kavar. I took this image in Baltimore, and literally like they're like I think they live in Vegas now, but it was very, very last minute. I had to hop on an Amtrak. I didn't get sleep. I photographed them, and I hopped right back to the train and like dropped all of the film off at the lab. And it was really beautiful to image them because they've been together for a while. They have kids. They each have their own kids, and they both birthed their own kids. And I think that image and the images that I made of them was in response to the erasure of black trans gay men from black gay spaces and black gay platforms, black gay like conversations. And I feel like we're always we're just erased from those spaces or not acknowledged, or when we are acknowledged, it's from a place of extraction and fetishization. And so I wanted to like highlight, and then also I think that, with trans people in general, but I think with trans men, I think that our sexualities are very conflated, and just not like, I don't know, like it's really interesting to have conversations with people and they're like surprised that, like just a trans guy can be attracted to other trans guys. Like, it's just, I don't know, it's just like really interesting. And so I wanted to highlight these, two black trans men who are like in love with each other, who love each other, who have families, who are building a home together. Because in my community and who I'm around, like I know that there's a lot of T for T relationships, romantic and platonic. And I think that T for T is also like a political positionality around like honoring trans people and wanting to have trans people in your life, you know, and caring for them and loving them. And, you know, I do know other trans couples, but I think that as a public image, I wanted to create this image to just show like, to just highlight their love for them, you know? And I remember somebody had asked me like, you know, is it like, although the idea behind it was also a response to the like erasure or extraction, you know, I think that the creation of images, you know, when I do make them with people, I think that it's always going to be for like, you know, the sitter in that way. And so I think that we made like really beautiful work, regardless of whether or not we met before. You know, they felt like brothers. Like they felt like we just kind of fell into this like vibe and this energy. And like the session only lasted for 30 minutes, but yeah, they just felt like home. And I think that there was just this common understanding about like, hey, like I don't see that many images of us in this way. And I think that, you know, like you said about reading the room with people, you know, I think that that's like really, really important, because I do know a lot of photographers who, you know, their positionality is very much like, I need to get what I need, you know? And I think that that could be very complicated. I don't think that it's wrong. But, you know, I think about street photographers and how there is that dynamic, but it's not coming from a malicious place. It's just sort of the foundation of that practice and maybe how it works. But yeah.
So for final question, I wanted to, if we can briefly discuss, Texas Isaiah has already spoken to this, what is the, and this also links up with the first panel, what's the significance of blackness, transness, queerness for artistic practice in general, and yours in particular, right? And just so also thinking about in the curatorial team, we spent quite some time discussing, you know, what is queer art, right? What is Black queer art? When who gets to be included in that, who does not, et cetera, and so on. Does it have to look in a particular kind of way? So yeah, I would be interested to hear both of you, because I think you both have, just from hearing you speak and from reading interviews with you and seeing your work, that you also have different relationships to that that form of categorization, which I don't think there's not, it can be problematic, I think, right? But I also think it doesn't have to be that way, right? So, yeah. Nadia?
I mean, I think Camille had said something earlier in her talk where, like, I'm a queer person, you know, like, I think it's similar with me. I don't necessarily, I don't see my work as necessarily queer, in the sense that it's not something that I deal with thematically or necessarily like aesthetically in my work. I mean, obviously it's there because I am queer, so naturally, you know, kind of, there's certain things that I probably have a kind of a different perspective on just because of that. It's my way of moving through the world that will inform the subject matters that I'm drawn to. And like particularly in terms of bodies, I think when I photograph bodies, there's a particular type of body and a way that the body moves that I'm usually looking for, and that's usually a queer body. I mean, that I'm kind of realizing slowly with my work over time, and that's because I've been doing it for so long now that I'm starting to recognize it. But then there's also like the complication of me being from a small place where, like, being gay is like criminalized still, and like actively so. And it's a small space. I mean, St. Grenadines is like a population of 110,000, very Christian, like kind of evangelical Christians, like homophobic.
That's smaller than Providence.
Yeah, it's really small. So I mean, there's the complications of that, of me, even, I mean, I was joking with Alex yesterday about this, like, like, even to post this as, like, me participating in a show like this, it's like, I can kind of get off with it because we don't use the language of queer in the Caribbean. So, like, people, it just kind of goes over people's heads. I mean, even though they might know, like, they wouldn't acknowledge it. I think if they had, like, other words that kind of, like, signified something more violent to them, then, like, I would be kind of met with a hostility. And I was anticipating it, honestly, when I posted it, but people just don't care. They just ignore you at the end of the day. But yeah, so, like, I also have to kind of reckon with that, and I think it's prohibited me because I am in this space. So I also am very conscious of my own safety, of moving around and what I do and how I look, and like, don't be too gay. It's like a weird thing, right? But like,
Shut it down.
Yeah, it's like, it does limit you, but in a way it also gives you access to spaces that, like, you might not otherwise have. So I think, yeah, it's pushed me to make work in a particular way. And I know it's a kind of a direct result of who I am and the way I experience the world. But yeah, I think that's it for me.
Do you mind repeating the question?
What's the significance
Sorry.
of blackness, transness, and queerness, and/or queerness for your work? Are those categories that you embrace? Is this how you characterize your work? And what do you think are the advantages and disadvantages of categorizing it, right? Which in some ways we always have to do. That's kind of part of, what, especially, also thinking about the whole curatorial bit, right? You're making particular kinds of decisions. You have to justify them, right, to particular kinds of governing bodies, fellowship places, et cetera, and so on. And so there has to be a kind of narrative that goes that goes along with it. So yeah, so I'm just wondering how you negotiate that. It seemed to me from everything that you said that this is something that you embrace and that you actively work with and through, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, yeah, like, I think that it's, important for, to use language that clearly represents, like, the individuals, like, in your work and who you are as a person. But I do think that is just, like, sort of one piece of it. I do feel like, it's very easy for work to just completely get conflated into, like, that. Like, I have I have to correct a lot of people when, they describe my work as just like, oh, you just photograph Black trans people. And I'm like, no, I don't. Like, yes, I do, but, like, that's not what the entirety of my archive is. And I think that it's easy for people to conflate things for them to understand, and for people to intentionally and, like, unintentionally, like, erase the other things that you are doing and pouring into in a lot of ways. But yeah, I think that also when I make work too, it's not, maybe I'm sitting with that when I'm writing about my work, but I think that when I'm creating images, it's not like well, I'm just gonna photograph a Black trans person a day. Like, it's not, that's not how that's not what happens. It just so happens that, sometimes, like, if I'm in a conversation with someone and I'm like, and it's a great conversation, I'm like, I think I want to image you. It'll just be that. It'll just be based off of, whatever we're talking about, whatever maybe somebody is interested in, if somebody's commissioning me, if I'm working on a project. But it doesn't, like, the person doesn't have to exist necessarily in that framework. But yeah, again, like, that is the work, but that's not all that the work is. So, I think sometimes, like, I try to be very mindful around, like, how I'm talking about my own work and then how other people are talking about my own work as well, because of conflation.
No, thank you. No, and I think, Nadia, what you were saying is really important. I think that's, in the end, also how we chose the work to include in the show, was that it was more about perspective rather
Yeah.
than representation, right?
Yeah.
Because I think the representational bit, it's important, right? And we know all the reasons that it's important, but it can also lead down paths where it narrows things instead of opening things up. So it's definitely important to have those perspectives. And it's really funny to hear you say that, because when I first saw your work, before I ever met you and knew who you were, it read to me as queer, like in very, but not because like they were like explicitly queer bodies being depicted, but as you talked about in terms of the perspective. So I think we're at the time for some questions, comments, praise songs, expressive dances, whatever genres you choose. I don't think we actually have the stuff to make visual art, but if we did, that would also be a possibility. In any case, I invite you to come into the conversation. And where's the mics are there. So if you're asking a question or have a comment or any of the other things. Florence, we mind getting the, either going there or grabbing it?
Hello, my name is Florence Blackwell. Thank you for being here, Texas Isaiah and Nadia and Professor Wahalia. I'm really sitting with everything that you all mentioned, but I really would love to think a little bit further just on the last bit about just representation. And I'm thinking about a lot of things. So this is kind of multi-tiered, but there's clearly this tension between the degradation of space and also this sort of desire to showcase the vitality of Blackness in the environment. But I'm interested in the ways that Black queer or Black trans art is commonly read as this sort of like in this discourse of like resiliency and agency, and Texas Isaiah, you were speaking about the desire of your sitters for people to have the opportunity to see themselves if they want to, and I feel like given that there's so much ongoing erasure that Black, queer, trans folks have to contend with, it seems like there is also this sort of overdetermination that's projected on the Black, queer, trans audience, viewers, that we will sort of automatically feel good, quote unquote, once we see ourselves. And I'm just sort of interested in how you sort of reckon with, consent. There's clearly consent when we, are looking at your interlocutors. But I'm also just interested in how you both are sort of thinking about the ongoingness of your archive, and I hear you both sort of mentioning moments of addition and then redaction as well. So yeah, I'm just sort of interested in just trust, consent, want, desire, agency, autonomy, resiliency, and sort of how you contend with imaging that and also sort of resisting that in your work. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for that question. I mean, I think, kind of coming from the perspective of, thinking about resiliency, I mean, I live in a very fragile space. I mean, the island is very small. We've been dealing with like 2 natural disasters in the last like 5 years. We had a volcanic eruption and then we had a hurricane, and and then a pandemic in the midst of volcanic eruption. So I think people on the island on a whole are very resilient. So I mean, it's kind of hard to divorce the image from that. I don't want to say performance of the body necessarily doing that, but it is a part of who we are as a people, and it's always going to come across, I think, in the images. I mean, Caribbean people have survived so much, from the kind of, I mean, and same within the sense of like Black Americans, like dealing with slavery and everything that has been unfolding as a result of that we're all still kind of grappling with now. In terms of like sort of building an archive, my work is kind of slowly it's not about people only. I mean, I'm also sort of dealing with multi-species as well, which is something that's kind of coming into the conversation, what I'm doing. Not necessarily to humanize these things, but to also be like, this is really a very intrinsic part of our survival. So I have been sort of like building what I refer to as like an ecological archive. I mean, thinking of like the apocalypse happening, and in 200 years, like, will there be a record of my island? Would anybody have any idea of what it looks like now? What would the coastlines look like? What would the reefs have looked like? What would the mountains have looked like? Like plant life, like animals. So I'm thinking of it beyond just the human. I mean, of course, the human is a very important element of it, but also just the environment in which we're kind of existing in. So the degradation is inevitable, but the natural environment is also very resilient. I mean, we saw that during the pandemic. Once we kind of remove this kind of human interference, like, things sort of started to come back to life. So I'm kind of interested in that tension between the environment, sort of like reshaping and degrading constantly. And I think it's a similar sort of thing with people. So it is a kind of an ongoing process. When we're documenting people and these spaces. So I think for me, that's kind of how I've been dealing with it in my work. Yeah.
That's a really good question. It's something that I do continuously ask as I'm moving along building, this archive with others. I think back to the first time that I did think about what a Black trans like visual archive would look like, and it was, I think, literally 10 years ago when Laverne Cox was on the cover of Time, which was a very monumental moment in a way where I started to think about my practice in a different way, and something that you said that was very interesting, something along the lines of like, we feel good once we see ourselves, and I don't believe that to be true, and I don't desire to perpetuate that, because not everyone, you see, that's the thing. It's like, even if there is consent, there's still going to be tension around confronting your own image. And even I don't feel good making a lot of the work that I make, and not because I don't enjoy it, but it's because there's a lot of grief there and a lot of loss and a lot of having to sit with being erased and having to contend with this idea of visibility when people assume that you have more than what you have, and you're dealing with the everyday life, and you're also losing people in community, and you're continuing to. That's a lot to sit with on a daily basis, and it rattles me every time. So I think, I think that I'm still confronting these things that you're mentioning, and I think sometimes I'll have an answer to a thing, and then other times I just don't, and I think that that's actually a really great place to be in, because I think I'm continuing to interrogate what it means to exist and what it means to make work, what it means to have work be attached to institutions, what it means to make work to be attached to all of these sort of, spaces that actually don't fully hold you. but then also at the same time understanding that I'm having these conversations with people that I'm not only photographing, but people that I'm sharing community with, you know? And so, yeah, like I think that it's just like really, it's complicated. But I think that the complexity is really good because, again, like even when I think about representation or even when I think about visibility, like I'm actually very like anti-visibility, like very like it's why like I don't have any images of myself online because I want to be able to control my own image. I want to be able to control who has access to me, and I also like don't always want to be seen. And I also work with people that don't always want to be seen, and I think that that's really beautiful because it does like complicate that like that assumption that, you know, especially with when it comes to transness and how deeply spiritual transness is and how much it actually fatigues everything that we know, right? Everything that we know, that means that everybody needs to be visually embodied and to be like consumed in that way, and that's just definitely not true because I think that also ties into like a lot of the violence that especially Black trans people like experience. So that's where I am with that, my answer. I can circle back as well.
I think there's also ways to photograph people without photographing the actual person. I mean, I think like your work does that quite beautifully. Like you don't necessarily have to reveal everything to, you know, to tell the story. I know we have this expression in the Caribbean when you think is bush is people. So like you like if you go into the forest, you think you're alone, but like there's always someone there looking, you know. So it's just like there's always a presence of somebody, you know. So I think it's the way that you kind of do that in the image can also, you know, still you can still be visible and invisible at the same time.
Which is where the shadow work and the silhouetting comes in. Like I think that darkness too, there's something very beautiful that occurs there, very private, you know. And so
Also thinking about Clifford's piece, the Night Sweats piece, right, where there's a marking of what we presume to be a body and sweat, but not the representation of an actual body, right? So thank you both. More questions, comments? Go ahead, Aaliyah.
Hello. This feels very weird. I'm gonna take this and like sit here. Thank you so much for this incredible panel. I have a question for Nadia. And zooming in a little bit, I feel like people talk a lot about kind of Caribbean art, but I want to think about St. Vincent in particular. I think there's often a lot of like Lesser Antilles erasure. People are always thinking about, you know, Jamaica, where it's like if they're you know, deigning to think about the Lesser Antilles, it's like TNT, you know.
Is this the Caribbean version of Diaspora Wars?
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Like people aren't. I mean, St. Vincent is like 18 miles by 11 miles, so it's like with an active volcano at the center. So it's like easy to not think about. But I wanted to ask you in particular, and you've touched on this a little bit, about the kind of challenges and the opportunities of coming from a place that's not so kind of on the map, really, or that people are not necessarily thinking about as a place where queer Black art or like queer Caribbean art kind of comes from. And so, you know, if you're from like a Jamaica or from, you know, the Virgin Islands or something like that, it's like you might have a kind of different experience. And so I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how St. Vincent in particular was a place that kind of both provided you with opportunities, but also kind of maybe, you know, offered some challenges in terms of developing your body of work.
Thank you for that question. I mean, I think the challenge was the opportunity, you know what I mean? Because the challenges were, I mean, endless. I mean, Camille was asking me earlier about the presence of like just having museums and galleries on the island. They're non-existent, you know? So I'm literally coming from a space where the opportunities I can create anything because of the absence of all these things, you know? I have no idea how I've been able to at least get to this point. I couldn't tell you. I just know that I had an impulse to create, and I had a great community of people on other islands who were kind of able to see the value in what I was doing and support it over time. And it's the reason I'm able to show my work here. It's the reason I'm able to kind of continue and have the confidence to continue in doing what I'm doing. But yeah, the challenges at home are really, it's a lot. I mean, there's a lack of support, even though people know what I'm doing, and they understand that there is some value to it. I mean, like I just had like a massive show in Venice last year with Ocean Space, and it's like, like you make this huge piece, you pour your heart and soul into something for like 4 years, and it's a kind of a milestone moment, and then you go home and it's just like crickets, and it's like you kind of have to just like take a deep breath and be like, okay, it's cool, like I'm still doing the thing, but and I think a lot of people in the Caribbean actually deal with that. I mean, I don't think it matters if you're from Jamaica or Trinidad or whatever. I mean, it is a kind of a disease that we seem to have. I mean, unfortunately, we kind of I don't know, like unless you're like kind of doing sports or something very specific, the arts are just not celebrated, and it's not unique to a small place. And even within the Caribbean, I mean, like there's a lot of things I've done. Like, for example, I had started a publication in 2011 with my then partner, and we made this like very profound sort of like visual arts culture magazine that was kind of, I don't want to say competing with small acts, but it was sort of like around that similar kind of ideas that made a huge impact. And people were like, this came from St. Vincent. Like, where is St. Vincent? Even people in the Caribbean, I've been to so many countries in the Caribbean, and people have no idea where St. Vincent and the Grenadines is. And I'm like, this is actually the most devastating part of the situation, that we from a region don't even know each other because we've been kind of pitted against one another. And it's, it's really toxic. I mean, at the end of the day, like, we're the ones who need to kind of be banding together and supporting each other. And, like, I'm proud when I see like an artist from the Bahamas or St. Kitts or wherever doing something. It's like, I want to be supportive, and it's just like, I wish we could all just kind of get on board with that. I mean, so that to me is, I would say, maybe one of my biggest gripes, but I've learned to just kind of deal with it because I'm so used to being from an invisible place. And I think part of that is what kind of pushed me to go into the ocean as well in some ways, because I'm like, this is actually the only unifying space we have, It's like, with the exception of like Guyana and Suriname, that being surrounded fully by water, but like in terms of like islands, it's like we all have to deal with this notion of like the limits of that boundary line of like, we don't know what's beyond that, It's like we're kind of confined to this geological prison in a way, And it's like, we understand that as a concept, but yeah, I mean, some spaces are a little bit bigger, but still, it's something you kind of, I think that needs, a lot of things need to kind of change politically, and there needs to kind of be more exchange between each other. We need to visit each other's islands. I mean, just kind of open our minds, because I think the restriction of being in one space is really what limits us.
I'm also thinking about, there's been a lot of discussion recently online. I think because there's a streamer that's been going, a Black American streamer that's been going from Caribbean island to Caribbean island, how the infrastructure in terms of travel between Caribbean islands is really horrible. That it's much easier to get from Trinidad to Miami, et cetera, and so on, than it would be to get to from Trinidad to Dominica, for instance, right? So that there's been lots of talk about that, how difficult that is. So structurally speaking, there are all these barriers, right? And I think in certain parts of the African continent, it's the same thing, like that, you can't get a direct flight from certain parts. You have to go through Europe. So,
Thank you.
I was about to pull mine out too.
More questions, comments? Antoine?
So thank you all for the super stimulating dialogue. I guess the question I have, as I've been listening to both of you, all of you, speak about this question around visibility. One of the things that, and it sort of goes back to something I mentioned during the first panel, which was about how it is that the work of the photographer sits in relation to the expectations of the photograph subject. And I was really struck, Texas, when you mentioned your willingness to remove images from exhibitions if the subject had an issue with it. And also, more recently, your point about not wanting to be photographed in some instances. And it's fascinating to me because, as I was thinking about like the larger arc of the history of photography as a tool of representation, and we know for certain that Black people have been the subject of photographs since the medium's invention, and it's likely that Black queer people have also been the subject since as early on, although maybe those images or subjects haven't been named as such. But today, one of the, I think, profound differences is that many so-called marginalized subjects are now using images, are using social media to shape their own image. And I've been fascinated by this recent sort of phenomenon called selfie dysmorphia or Snapchat dysmorphia, and how, especially among students, there's this almost obsessive interest in their own image, as mediated through filters and all these other things that social media enables, that when they see an image of them produced by a photographer using analog technology, that sometimes they don't recognize themselves or they're unwilling to have that image circulate because it runs counter to the image that has been cultivated through this recent technology. And I'm just wondering if that has any impact on your ability to get subjects to be interested, because you both spoke about how sometimes it can be hard to find people willing to be photographed. And I'm curious if that has any influence on the sense of trust. Any thoughts along those lines, I'd be grateful. Thank you.
That's a really phenomenal question, actually.
Thank you.
I think it depends. I think I photograph a lot of millennials, so I think that our relationship to images are just a lot different, and our relationship to how we like have formed community is just different. So I don't necessarily feel like I've had conversations with people or have encountered people, but when I do encounter like Gen Z folks, I do see like a difference in maybe when there is an interest in me, or like, when I'm asked to take images, I do feel like there is like a different kind of resistance. And I've always been interested in what that is. And I think that you kind of potentially pointed out what that thing is. Because again, there's a difference between someone who's like, I'm not really ready to confront an image of myself because you're taking it, or I'm not ready for this image to be publicized, versus I prefer to control my own image through a distortion, like distorting my own image because of desire. Desire informs everything. I'm gonna sit with that, but I think that it's very like interesting to think about people's like access to like photography or photographs, and how much people are also sort of. I feel like also, when I think about the iPhone, I think that there has just been more enhancement with the camera in the front versus the camera in the back, unless like Google phones are different. But I'm also thinking about how technology also aids to that as well, but that's a good.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, I mean, I think I can speak specifically to the underwater work. I think it's a little bit different. People have expectations of how they think they're going to look in an image above land. And I really haven't had to deal with that because I think most people are kind of surprised when I show them an image of themselves. Like, they don't necessarily see themselves in that way. So there's that. And also, there isn't a lot of images to reference of people underwater. So it's like I'm kind of contesting with a very limited range of influence, so it's like, which is I mean, it's kind of a huge responsibility because I feel like I'm like the person also responsible for setting a standard. You know, so when people see themselves in that way, it's already special because I mean, they're like, it's like, I don't know, like if you had the opportunity to take a photo of yourself in space, you know, I mean, it's like, it's kind of like this like very otherworldly environment that you don't get to take selfies in. To know what you even look like in that space, you know? So for me, I haven't had that pushback as yet. I think there's definitely an expectation of wanting to perform a certain way for the camera, and like, you know, like some of the boys, like they'll be like doing stuff underwater, and like, I'm not so much interested in those moments, you know, but even when they see themselves otherwise, they know it's special, and I feel like it resonates with them, and yeah, there's not really that pushback in that way for me.
That makes all the sense.
Okay, I think we're actually at perfect time now. So thank you both.
Thank
so
you.
much.
Appreciate it.
Thank you all.